Hi. So this week we are going to be offering you an alternative to the picture books that have been read to you for the last few weeks. As well as those this week, we are going to be reading to you a chapter. So this week's chapter book is Michael Morpurgo's The Butterfly Lion. So grab yourself a blanket, a drink and a snack, and sit back and relax. Chilblains and semolina pudding. Butterflies only live short lives. They flutter and flower for just a few glorious weeks, and then they die. You see, to see them, you have to be in the right place at the right time. And that's how it was when I saw the butterfly lion. I happened to be in just the right place at just the right time. I didn't dream him. I didn't dream any of it. I saw him blue and shimmering in the sun one afternoon in June when I was young and a long time ago. But I don't forget. I mustn't forget. I promised I wouldn't. I was 10, went away at boarding school in the deepest of Wiltshire. I was far from home and didn't want to be. It was a diet of Latin and stew and rugby and detentions and cross-country runs and chilblains and marks and squeaky beds and semolina pudding. And then there was Basher Beaumont, who terrorised and tormented me so that I lived every waking moment of my life in dread of him. I had often thought of running away, but only once did I ever pluck up the courage to do it. I was homesick. After a letter from my mother, Basher Beaumont had cornered me in the bathroom and smeared black shoe polish in my hair. I had done badly in a spelling test, and Mr. Carter had stood me in the corner with a book on my head all through the lesson, his favourite torture. I was more miserable than I had ever been before, and I picked at the plaster on the wall, determined there and then that I would run away. I took off the next Sunday afternoon. With any luck, I wouldn't be missed till supper, and by that time I would be home and free. I climbed the fence at the bottom of the school park, behind the trees where I couldn't be seen, and I ran for it, as if bloodhounds were after me, not stopping until I was through Innocent's Breach and out to the road beyond. I had my escape all planned. I would walk to the station. It was only 5 miles or so, and catch a train to London. Then I would take the underground home, and I'd just walk in and tell them I was never, ever going back. There wasn't much traffic, but all the same I turned up the collar of my coat so that no one would catch a glimpse of my uniform. It was beginning to rain now. Those heavy, hard drops that means that there's more to come. I crossed the road and ran along the grass verge under the shelter of the trees. Beyond the grass verge there was a high brick wall, much of it covered with ivy. It stretched away in the distance, continuous as far as the eye could see, except for a massive arched gateway at the bend of the road. A great stone lion bestrode the gateway. As I came closer, I could see he was roaring in the rain, his lip curled and his teeth bared. I stopped and stared up at him for a moment. That was when I heard a car slowing down behind me. I did not think twice. I pushed open the gate, darted through, and flattened myself behind the stone pillar. I watched the car until it disappeared around the bend. To be caught would mean a caning. 4 strokes, maybe 6 across the back of the knees. Worse, I would be back at school, back to detentions, and back to Basher Beaumont. To go along the road was dangerous, too dangerous. I would try to cut across country to the station. It would be longer that way, but much safer. Strange meeting. I was still deciding which direction to take when I heard a voice from behind me. "Who are you? What do you want?" I turned. "Who are you?" she asked again. The old lady stood before me, no bigger than I was. She scrutinised me from under the shadow of her dripping straw hat. She had piercing black eyes that I didn't want to look into. "I didn't think it would rain," she said, her voice gentler. "Lost, are you?" I said nothing. She had a dog on a leash at her side, a big dog. There was an ominous growl in his throat, and his hackles were up. all along his back. She smiled. The dog says that you're on private property. She went on pointing her stick at me accusingly. She edged aside my raincoat with the end of her stick. Run away from that school, have you? Well, if it's anything like it used to be, I can't say I blame you. But we can't just stand here in the rain, can we? You'd better come inside. We'll give him some tea, shall we, Jack? Don't worry about Jack. He's all bark and no bite. Looking at Jack, I found that hard to believe. I don't know why. I never for one moment thought of running off. I often wondered later why I went with her so readily. I think it was because she expected me to, willed me to somehow. I followed the old lady and the dog up to her house, which was huge as my school, and it looked as if it had grown out of the ground. There was hardly a brick or a stone or a tile to be seen. The entire building was smothered in red creeper, and there was dozens of ivy-clad chimneys sprouting skywards from the roof. We sat down close to the stove in a vast vaulted kitchen. The kitchen's always the warmest place, she said, opening the oven door. We'll soon have you dry in no time. Scones? She went on, bending down with some difficulty and reaching inside. I always have scones on Sunday. And tea to wash it down. All right with you? She went on chatting away as she busied herself with a kettle and a teapot. The dog eyed me for the while from his basket, unblinking. I was just thinking, she said. You'll be the first young man I've had inside this house since Bertie. She was silent for a while. The smell of the scones wafted through the kitchen. I ate 3 before I even touched my tea. They were sweet and crumbly and succulent with melted butter. She talked on merrily again to me and to the dog. I wasn't sure which. I wasn't really listening. I was looking out of the window behind her. The sun was bursting through the clouds and lighting the hillside. A perfect rainbow arched through the sky. But miraculous though it wasn't the rainbow that fascinated me. Somehow the clouds were casting a strange shadow over the hillside, a shadow the shape of a lion, roaring like the one over the archway. Sun's come out, said the old lady, offering me another scone. I took it eagerly. Always does, you know. It may be difficult to remember sometimes, but there's always sun behind the clouds, and the clouds do go in the end, honestly. She watched me eat, a smile on her face that warmed me to the bone. Don't think I want to go, because I don't. Nice to see a boy eat so well. Nice to have company, but all the same, I think you'd better go back to school after you've had your tea, hadn't I? I'd better get you back to school after you've had your tea, hadn't I? You'll only be in trouble otherwise. Must have run off, you know. You've got to stick it out, see things through. Do what's got to be done no matter what. She was looking out of the window as she spoke. My Bertie taught me that, bless him. Or maybe I taught him, I can't remember now. And she went on talking, and my mind was elsewhere again. The lion on the hillside was still there, but now it was blue and shimmering in the sunlight. It was as if he were breathing, as if he were alive. It wasn't a shadow anymore. No shadow is blue. No, you're not seeing things, the old lady whispered. It's not magic. He's real. He's our lion, Bertie's and mine, our beautiful butterfly lion. What do you mean? I asked. She looked at me long and hard. I'll tell you if you like, she said. Would you like to know? Would you really like to know? I nodded. Have another scone first and another cup of tea, then I'll take you to Africa, where our lion came from, where my Bertie came from too. Bit of a story, I can tell you. You ever been to Africa? No, I replied. Well, you're going, she said. We're both going. Suddenly I wasn't hungry anymore. All I wanted now was to hear her story. She was back in her chair, gazing out of the window. She told it slowly, thinking before each sentence. and all the while she never took her eyes off the butterfly lion, and neither did I. Timbavati. Bertie was born in South Africa in a remote farmhouse near a place called Timbavati. It was shortly after Bertie first started to walk that his mother and father decided a fence must be put around the farmhouse to make a compound where Bertie could play in safety. It wouldn't keep snakes out, but nothing could do that. But at least Bertie would be safe now from the leopards and the lions and the spotted hyenas. Enclosed within the compound were the lawn and the gardens of the front of the house, and the stables and the barns were at the back. All the room a child could need or want, you might think, but not Bertie. The farm stretched as far as the eye could see in all directions, 20,000 acres of veld. Bertie's father farmed cattle, but times were hard, and many of the rivers and waterholes had all but dried up. With fewer wildebeest and impala to prey on, the lions and the leopards would sneak up on the cattle whenever they could, so Bertie's father was more often than not away from home with his men guarding the cattle. Every time he left, he'd say the same thing. "Don't you open that gate, Bertie, you hear me? There's lions out there, leopards, elephants, hyenas. You stay put, you hear?" Bertie would stand at the fence and watch him ride out, and he would be left behind with his mother, who was also his teacher. There were no schools for 100 miles, and his mother too was also warning him to stay inside the fence. "Look what happened in Peter and the Wolf," she would say. His mother was often sick with malaria, and even when she wasn't sick, she would be listless and sad. There were good days, and when she would play the piano for him and play hide and seek around the compound, or he'd sit on her lap on the sofa out on the veranda, and she'd just talk and talk all about her home in England, about how much she hated the wilderness and the wildness and the loneliness of Africa, and how Bertie was everything to her. But those days, they were rare days. Every morning he'd climb into bed and snuggle up to her, hoping against hope that today she'd be well and happy. But so often she wasn't, and Bertie would be left on his own again, to his own devices. There was a waterhole downhill from the farmhouse and some distance away. The waterhole, when there was water in it, became Bertie's whole world. He would spend hours in the dusty compound, his hands gripping the fence, looking out at the wonders of the veld, at the giraffes drinking spread-legged at the waterhole, at the browsing impala, the tails twitching alert, the warthogs snorting and snuffling under the shade, at the baboons and the zebras and the wildebeest and the elephants bathing in the mud. But the moment Bertie always longed for was when a pride of lions came padding out of the veld. The impala were the first to spring away. Then the zebra would panic and gallop off. Within seconds, the lions would have the whole waterhole to themselves, and they would crouch to drink. From the safe haven of the compound, Bertie looked and learned as he grew up. By now, he could climb the tree and by the farmhouse and sit high in his bushes. He could see better from up here. He would wait for his lions for hours on end. He got to know the life of the waterhole so well he could feel when the lions were out there, even before he saw them. Bertie had no friends to play with, but he always said he was never lonely as a child. At night, he loved reading his books and losing himself in the stories, and by day his heart was out in the veld with the animals. That was where he yearned to be. Whenever his mother was well enough, he would beg her to take him outside the compound, but her answer was always the same. "I can't, Bertie. Your father has forbidden it," she said. And that was that. The men would come home with their stories of the veld and the family of cheetahs sitting like sentinels of the leopard they had spotted high in the tree larder, watching over his kill, of the hyenas that they had driven off, of the herd of elephants that stampeded the cattle, and Bertie would listen, wide-eyed, agog. Again and again he asked his father if he could go and help guard the cattle. His father just laughed, patted his head and said it was man's work. He did teach Bertie how to ride and how to shoot too, but always within the confines of the compound. Week in, week out, Bertie had to stay behind the fence. He made up his mind, though, that if no one would take him out into the veld, then one day he would go by himself. But something always held him back. Perhaps it was one of those tales he'd been told of black mamba snakes whose bite could kill you within 10 minutes, of hyenas whose jaws would crush you to bits, of vultures who would finish off anything that was left so no one would ever find even the bits. For the time being, he stayed behind the fence. But the more he grew up, the more his compound became a prison to him. One evening, Bertie must have been about 6 years old by now. He was sitting up high in the branches in his tree, hoping against hope the lions might come down for their sunset drink, as they often did. He was thinking of giving up, for it would soon be dark to see much now, when he saw a solitary lioness come down to the waterhole. Then he saw that she was not alone. Behind her, on unsteady legs, came what looked like a lion cub. But it was white, glowing white, in the gathering gloom and dust. The lioness drank, and the cub played at catching her tail. And then, when she had had her fill, the two of them slipped away into the long grass and were gone. Bertie ran inside, screaming with excitement. He had to tell someone, anyone. He found his father working at his desk. "Impossible," said his father. "You're seeing things that aren't there. You're telling fibs, one of the two." "I saw him, I promise," Bertie insisted, but his father would have none of it, and sent him to his room for arguing. His mother came to see him later. "Anyone can make a mistake, Bertie dear," she said. "It must have been the sunset plays tricks with your eyes sometimes. There's no such thing as a white lion." The next evening, Bertie watched again at the fence, but the white lion cub and the lioness did not come. Nor did they the next evening, nor the next. Bertie began to think he must have been dreaming it. A week or so passed, and there had been only a few zebra and wildebeest down at the waterhole. Bertie was already upstairs in his bed when he heard his father riding into the compound, and then the heavy stamp of the boots on the veranda. "We got her! We got her," he said, saying. "Huge lioness, massive she was. Taken a half a dozen of my best cattle in the last 2 weeks. Well, she won't be taking them any more." Bertie's heart stopped. In that one terrible moment he knew which lioness his father was talking about. There would be no doubt about it. His white lion cub had been orphaned. "But what if," Bertie's mother was saying, "what if she had young ones to feed? Perhaps they were starving." "So would we be if we let her go on. We had to shoot her," his father retorted. Bertie lay there all night listening to the roaring echoing through the veld, as if every lion in Africa was sounding. He turned his face into his pillow and could think of nothing but the orphaned white cub. And he promised himself there and then that if ever the cub came to the waterhole looking for its dead mother, then he would do what he had never dared to do. He would open the gate, go out and bring him home. He would not let him die out there all along. No lion cub came to his waterhole. All day, every day, he waited for him to come, but he never came.